Okay, I think that we can start. So today and tonight, we have two special guests from MIT Media Lab, and actually more than a guest, they are old friends of Tongji. And I think everybody knows Media Lab, but I think today, Professor Ken Larson and Luis will bring some of the latest development of research on pedagogical model in the MIT Media Lab. So it was very interesting that in 2017, I visited the MIT Media Lab and signed an agreement with then the director of the Media Lab, Joe. And at that time, I came with my former president, Professor, at that time is Professor Zhong Xiaozhang. And Professor Zhong is very curious, and he asked Joy, what's the difference between Media Lab and architecture, the School of Architecture? And at that time, I remember Joy said that it's a Media Lab born out of Department of Architecture in the MIT. Just like the College of Design and Innovation was a part of College of Architecture and Urban Planning. And then 9 years later, the job market changed dramatically. I think it's also maybe I think that there is a time that the School of Architecture and the School of Design we can work together. So that's the reason I invited the Dean of the College of Architecture and Urban Planning, and Professor Xiaozhang from our College of Design and Innovation. As we decided to talk, I think there's something interesting actually going on. So this is the era of collaboration and not competition. Okay, so let's start. Ken, you will start first, right? So let's warmly welcome Professor Ken Larson, and he what do you want to talk? I think he will start from a general introduction of the MIT Media Lab. Am I correct?
Yes.
Okay, let's welcome.
I'll do an introduction of the Media Lab really quickly. But it's great to be back at Tongji. I've been here many times. Great to see old friends. And I think we're just beginning, actually. I think we've had this 9-year collaboration. I think it's ready to just take off, and we've had some really interesting meetings. So thank you all, and I hope you can go on this journey with us. All right, what is the Media Lab? The Media Lab is the most diverse lab on the planet in terms of disciplines. You see all of these various disciplines. These are all separate research groups, and range from biomechatronics to these high-tech prosthetic devices, sculpting evolution. Here, Kevin Esfeld is using genetic engineering to create mice that are not susceptible to Lyme disease, tick-borne disease. Life on Kindergarten, one of my favorite groups about learning in children. If you know the Scratch programming language for children that was developed out of that lab. And we're City Science, and that's what we're going to talk about today. And it really is an anti-disciplinary place. We like to break down the walls between disciplines, and I love the Media Lab. I started in architecture, but that's a single discipline. I love the Media Lab because they have all of these disciplines. The ideas are just in the air. These are some of the principles. Actually, Joey developed these. I still like them. I won't go through them all, but these are learning over education. Education is one way. Learning is learning by doing. We believe in that. Compass over maps. Don't try to develop a detailed research plan. There's too many things that are unpredictable. But know which direction you're heading in. Disobedience over compliance. People misunderstand that sometimes. But nobody ever won a Nobel Prize by being obedient and following the rules. So we we like to think about, you know, play by the rules, but break them if you have to. And now we live in a world that's in a state of flux, and I believe that we should be designing for change. So I'm going to quickly go through some of the work we're doing, and I'm starting with a thought experiment. A few months ago, I was asked to do a presentation to talk about how we were using AI. I didn't want to just say, well, we're doing this project and that project. This is a story and a kind of a thought experiment that we developed. Savier-de-Vosges, what is that? That's a small town in France. This is Armistice Day, 1919, 30 years later. The Nazis, when they were abandoning the city, destroyed it. 10,000 people were displaced, and the city was left in ruins. So, how many of you know this guy? Only 2 people know this guy?
Everybody.
Oh, no, a few people know.
Everybody.
All right.
Oh, be careful.
Le Corbusier. He was the most famous architect of the time, probably the most influential architect of the 20th century. He was hired to develop a new plan for Savier-de-Vosges. It was the most radical and ambitious reconstruction plan after the war, and the community hated it. And it was rejected unanimously by the city council. So we asked in this thought experiment, how could a single human designer directing a team of agents, AI agents, reimagine the project in a way the community would embrace? So the first thing we do is we send agents out to gather design. And we have Robot Moses is our lead agent, so he's coordinating all this work. So we gather all the information that we can find on the project. And this is drawings from Le Corbusier. It was this design that had 8 housing projects, Unité de Habitation, Central Plaza, a municipal building, etc. And so, okay, we've gathered all that information. Now we have to complete the design. So we have another agent trained on the architectural language of Le Corbusier that can turn these sketches into a more refined design. But these are like stage sets. They're just dumb. They're just pixels. But you know, they're useful to resolve some of the design. Then we build a 3-dimensional environment for our synthetic population, for the agents that will inhabit the project to move through. So here's a navigation mesh for a little piece of the project. The walking surfaces, how people go up and down stairs and elevators, etc. And we tag every space in this project so we know where are the shops and the offices and what type of housing units, etc. So now we have a fully tagged 3-dimensional model and a navigation mesh for all the routes and pathways that people would take. So now we have to create the profiles of the synthetic population. So we send another agent out to gather information on the activities and demographic profiles of the population of this small village in eastern France. So now we have all those demographic profiles. This just gives you an example of them. Sorry. So you can see we can have hundreds and hundreds of profiles. In fact, with enough computational power, we can have a unique profile for each of the 10,000 inhabitants of that development. And we can, you know, through the data that we've collected, understand what their daily activities might be with a huge range of variation. Okay. So now we have the 3-dimensional world, we have the profiles of people. Now we need to simulate the human dynamics. This is where the real work begins, and architects essentially never get this far. So we can now populate this virtual world with the synthetic agents, and you can see these are color-coded by different profiles. You can see them taking the stairs to the 7th and 8th floors where the retail was. You see how people are accessing that. You can see how people go out of the building. So the blue dots are where people leave the building. Okay. Now we can look at every individual agent. So this is a 65-year-old woman who lives in the Unité number 5. She goes to the butcher, the baker, the wine merchant, and we can follow her activities, and we can follow similar activities of every agent in the building. And along the way, we can see what her experiences. You can see the decisions she makes and the routes she chooses. She gets to an intersection, she goes left and right. We can understand why. We can do this for each of the agents in this project and collect data about their behavior. So we can look at what's happening at the overall site and the movement of people, the paths they take, etc. And we can do this morning and day, weekend, weekday, summer, winter, holiday, workday, etc. Okay? What does that tell you? Nothing really yet. So we have to evaluate it. Right? So now, this is just like collecting telecom data from real people moving through the city. We can collect synthetic data from a synthetic population. And you can see here people starting at the housing project, but what you can quickly find is they're too far away from the amenities in the central plaza to really perform well. We can do this for the individual buildings, and in this case, this is where the retail is. So red bad, green good. The red spaces don't have enough people living in the project to support those types of retails. On the other hand, there's not enough space for retail to have the full range of amenities that people would need in that building. And then we can visualize the performance in different ways, charts and graphs. So this is vibrancy, so the various places in the building where it's high and low vibrancy. And we can score it. So we find only 35%, 34% of the people have 5-minute access to the amenities they need, for example. And we can develop other visualizations, a radar plot. This is the diversity of the functions, the proximity, the density. This is old Sandier. We can see in some ways it works better, in some ways it performs more poorly. So with that, we need to make it better, right? So now we can generate alternatives. So now we can use genetic algorithms to look at various arrangements of the project. And we can look, this is a few examples, but we can literally look at hundreds, even thousands of alternatives. We can score each one of them and converge on a more optimal solution. Now, what we find is to make it perform better, all the buildings need to come much closer together. There's no shopping street, so you need a more central place to have the kind of vibrancy that people in the village would look for. And then, of course, we can take. We're not using the computation to identify an optimal solution. We're identifying a range of high-performing solutions. So now we can develop a cityscope, an interactive cityscope. We built them here at Tonji, where the community can look at different arrangements. And in this case, in this thought experiment, they put in a bridge that connects the upper levels. So now you have this. You have the 7th and 8th floor where all the buildings are connected. So you have this upper level shopping street, and the community has more control over what will meet their needs and their aspirations. And if we did this properly, now it forms a perfect circle, okay, where everything's in harmony. Then we still have to turn it into urban design. So we can try to use some of these generative systems. We can take the schematic tofu models and turn them into, something that maybe the community would aspire to. This doesn't work quite as well. It's still a little heavy-handed. So you still need humans in the loop, at least for some number of years, to resolve the design in a way. That's kind of a high-level thought experiment. Everything I talked about, we're working on these various projects. So these are the academic projects that are working towards those projects, that vision. Talk to me or Luis if you want to learn more about some of that. All right, let's talk about what we're actually doing, beyond this thought experiment. One thing I'm very proud of, when you come into our lab, you will see the various projects we're working on around the world. That's Chile, that's Andorra. You see the various types of projects that we're working on, mobility, transformable environments. I'll talk about some of these. But I think maybe the most important one is this, is the network of city science labs that we have. And here are the current labs. And you can see we're in Shanghai. I would like the Shanghai, the Tongji lab, to be a node that connects a whole series of city science labs around China. Right? Why not? And these are the new labs we have in development. We're looking at Bhutan, Luis and I'll be in Osaka soon, South America. We're looking at a lab in Hanoi. So this is, for me, this is really exciting because this has people on the ground in these various places looking at the problems that are unique and finding solutions. Every year we have a City Science Summit. This is in Spain. The next one, rather, will be in Spain, northern Spain, in November in San Sebastian. And what we try to do with all these projects is bring some, the reason I call it city science, not that we're doing science per se, but we're trying to bring something of the city science process to the process of design and integration of technology and governance in cities. And we break it into insight, transformation, simulation, consensus, and governance. So what does that mean? Insight is pretty simple. That's just collecting and analyzing data so you know what the current conditions are. We started out simply by projecting data visualizations onto a three-dimensional model, like the mobility systems, with flow, solar gain, etc. About 10, 11 years ago, we started really focusing on telecom data, location-based data. This is in Andorra, where we can see, in this case, where people are gathering for Cirque du Soleil. Luis will talk a little bit more about this particular project. Okay, we understand the current conditions, now we have to think about how to make it better. That's transformation. And there are many things you can do, but I'll talk about two. So we start with mobility. This is 1908 in Barcelona, and the streets were very different than streets today. How are they different? What do you see? Yell it out. You see any crosswalks? No. Do you see any traffic signals? No. Do you see any barriers? No. No, the streets were for people, right? Then Barcelona, just 30 years, well, 50 years later. Now what do you see? You see streets like they are today, right? I want to go back to the streets of 1908. And you still find them in places. This is Amsterdam. I shot this little video. I put it on my camera on a garbage can and just shot this. And you see that people are going there, the cars are going through slowly, the train goes by, and people move out of the way. It's almost like Barcelona, 1908. So we've been looking at ways to reclaim the streets. So we started some years ago with the city car. This was a fun project. So you see there's robot wheels, driving, steering, suspension, braking, all in each robot wheel. It could spin, it could fold to occupy very little space. People thought we were kind of crazy, but we built a full-scale prototype and we tested it on the street. It had all of those features. And but when we finished that, we thought, well, it's still a car. We want to get rid of cars. So then we said, and it was a car driven by humans. So we started to make lighter weight vehicles that were autonomous. So but if you're occupying that kind of shared space, like in Barcelona 1908, the vehicles need to be good citizens. They need to be able to signal their intentions. So the headlights would make eye contact, etc. But then I said, we can push it even farther. So we built a little three-wheel vehicle that had many of those characteristics. You see it has LiDAR and all the other sensing this vehicle has here. This is how it occupies the street. Does a little dance around the people, it defers to them. It's trying to be a good citizen. This was in the Cooper Hewitt Museum where we developed it a little further, made it a little sexier, but the same idea. It's really human-machine interface issues that we were not focused on. Then we built an even more refined prototype where you call it like an Uber, comes to you wherever you are, has a condition box on the back for food delivery. So off-peak it can deliver food, during peak hours it moves people. This is donkey mode where it follows you if you want to go for a walk. And then we thought, well, let's push it even farther. Let's make an autonomous bicycle that you call like an Uber or Didi. So here the rear wheel folds out to create a stable tricycle, so you can call for a bicycle to come to you wherever you are. Housing. So we've done a lot with housing. We brought a lot of the same ideas to small apartments. We built this in the Biennale 10 years ago, maybe 11 years ago. But you can see here, this has a queen-size bed, 19 square meters. Queen-size bed, an office, a dining room for 6 people, a living room for 6 people. You know, it's a real transformer house. And we have a tiny little bathroom, but it opens up to give you access to a washer dryer and a shower. And when we finished this project, these are the graduate students who went there. We said, well, maybe there's a startup idea here. Maybe we could launch a company. Again, people didn't think this was viable. How can you build such an apartment? But here's the team that started the startup. So, and what was interesting is, if you're an architect, you're not optimizing the floor plan, you're developing 6 floor plans in this case with the ability to transform instantly and effortlessly from any one to any other. And when we launched the company, we got funding from Alphabet, the Google parent company, and IKEA. And we have been developing this commercialization process ever since. So here you see, in this case, the bed comes down from the ceiling. And you have an office that opens up on demand. And this, by the way, is Hudson Yards in Manhattan. You have a view to the Statue of Liberty. And there's a little walk-in closet on demand. I just shot that on my iPhone. I like to stay there whenever I go to New York. And we have a collaboration with Marriott to reinvent the hotel room. So here's a hotel room by day and by night. Now we're in 100 buildings in 60 U.S. cities, so one day maybe we'll bring this to Asia. I don't know. Okay. So now we've understood current conditions. We have a bunch of ideas, many more than this, that we've proposed. Which ones are good? You have to do simulation. Right? So we basically have 2 types of simulation models that we build. One is more top-down, holistic, and I'll give you a scenario that I'd like to show. We did this for a climate study, but it's useful to show the process. So 2.5 tons of CO2 is the yearly average carbon budget for every person on the planet if you have 80% chance of limiting global warming to 2 degrees Celsius. And Kendall Square, where we work, is about 17. So that means we would need to reduce that by 7x to meet 2 degrees centigrade goals. 1.5, I think, it's impossible now that people talk about. So we said, well, is that even possible? So we developed an interface that where you could dial these sliders up and down and look at various scenarios. And in CPU, the social, environmental, economic impact through this radar cloud that CO2 emissions, see how they're changing in real time, and we thought, well then, as another thought experiment, let's just dial everything up to 100% and see how far we could get, even if it was politically and socially impossible. So we start by decarbonizing the grid, the Massachusetts roadmap. That takes us from 17.2 to 16.3. Thought it'd be more, but it wasn't. Then we said let's assume 100% electric vehicles. Now China's come a long ways towards that. So even if we did that, we're only down to 16 because there's so much embodied energy in these vehicles that the CO2 emissions, if you look at embodied and operational, is not great. Then we said let's assume half the population's working remotely, hybrid work. That brought it down a little bit more. Then we said 100% of retrofit of all the older buildings in the community. And again, there's so much embodied energy in these new materials that the savings was not what we hoped for. And by the way, you can look at the social, economic, environmental impact. So retrofitting buildings performed pretty poorly. Then we said let's do something really extreme and just build housing near where everybody works. And that brought it all the way down to 11.2, and it has a really profound social, economic, and environmental impact. But people still need to have access to schools and shopping and recreation, etc. So we then assumed that everybody has everything they need in daily life in close proximity to where they live and work. Okay. And now we're down to 9. Then we took our tiny little apartments and we're down to 8.5. And micro-mobility we talked about, well, we're down to 8.4. Now, we'd already got rid of all the cars by now, so if we'd done it in a different order, it would have been much greater. Then we said, well, what if nobody ate meat? Everybody ate a plant-based diet. So that turned out to have about the equivalent savings to 100% electric vehicles. And then we said, well, we still have non-renewable energy in the grid, so let's then deploy small modular nuclear, ultimately fusion, and every community has 100% renewable energy. Now we're down to 5.9. By the way, this has, good environmental impact, but actually negative social and economic impact. So we have to look at all three. The point is that it's these community scale interventions, the kind of issues that urban planners and architects, city officials think about that have the greatest, not only environmental impact, but the greatest social and economic impact to the local community. So that's where we should focus, I think. And it's not the conventional green agenda that's promoted by industry. Then we also do these behavioral bottom-up models, so modeling complex behavior. I showed this in the scenario in France, but just to give you a little more detail. This was a sandbox where we were looking at people with different profiles and how they access the stairs, the elevators, ramps, escalators, etc. And of course, if you're an older person, you may not take the stair, you take the elevator or the escalator. If you're in a wheelchair, you always take the elevator, etc. So it just gives you an example of how people of different profiles are making different choices. And we're doing a lot of this in our consulting firm, where we've actually taken it farther than even we have it at MIT. So this is a little video that we did. It's the same issue, that we create a virtual model. We have profiles of people. We introduce this synthetic population. We collect data on their performance, and then we can rapidly iterate through different designs and compare them. So we're doing this with real projects around the world. Okay. Now we're to consensus. So you understand current conditions, you have a lot of good ideas, you simulate what works and what doesn't work, but unless you bring the community along and the leadership, it's very hard to do anything new. And particularly if it's uncomfortable with people. People don't like change. So we've done a couple of projects, many projects, but a couple I'll show you that point to this future. The Boston, some years ago, was looking at a bus rapid transit system where the lines were all connecting through a particular neighborhood that was majority African American. They were very skeptical of what the city was proposing. So we, in the community center, we built these 3 platforms at the regional scale, community scale, street scale to show the impact of the bus rapid transit system. So here, this woman could indicate where she lived, where she worked, and see how each of the different alternatives would change her commute time, and everybody visiting could see that. Here you could move these optically tagged Lego bricks around representing stations, so that we look at the station design location, and here we're looking at the stations at the curb versus the gold standard in the center. You can have bike lanes that replace parallel parking spaces. So the community people would do workshops, they'd come together, they could work through the models, and as they do that, they can see in real time the data all updating, and they can make more informed decision about that future. In Hamburg, when they were looking at maybe 70,000 refugees coming into the city, we had been hired, in fact, we set up a city science lab in Hamburg, initially to help them think through the Olympic Village in 2024, and then they were realizing this huge influx of refugees, so the mayor asked us to switch and work with each community to find sites to build housing, permanent housing for the refugees. This is how they were living in these temporary shelters. So we built 2 platforms, so roughly 30 people at a time in a workshop would stand around a model like this. They would indicate areas that they thought might be suitable for housing. That would create a zoom window to a larger table. They would move our optically tagged Lego bricks around representing number of units. They would get immediately feedback as to the access to jobs and mass transit and schools and all of that. And at the end of each session, the table looks something like this. We would collect data. They would come back and discuss it. And they were competing to see which district could accommodate the most refugees. It was very interesting because it empowered all the people who wanted to engage creatively in the process. You can see the various districts up there and the indication of the number of people that were being accommodated. So, and Olaf Scholz was the mayor. He later became the German chancellor, and he was brilliant. He said, every district, rich and poor, shares equally. The mayor will not dictate where housing is built. The community had to decide, and no ghettos could be created. Everybody needed to assimilate into society. And an article in the Atlantic about this project, Germany's radical pro-refugee urban planning experiment, but it was really consensus building experiment. So we built other platforms like this. This is a platform we built for the Shenzhen Planning Bureau, which is still active. 6 years later, we saw it a couple of days ago in Shenzhen. Leon worked on that with us. Okay, last thing I'll talk about, governance. So we've gone through this whole process, we've reached consensus with the community, but unless that gets into public policy, it's very hard to realize change. We looked at Kendall Square. This is Kendall Square, 1966. Kendall Square is where MIT is. This is MIT's campus right here. And over those 50, 60 years, it basically turned into an office park. So we went back and looked at the data. So starting in 1980, that purple line was new office and lab space being built. These other lines are the various types of housing and amenities. You see they're out of sync. There's really almost no feedback between them. We looked at zoning, because zoning is so critical, particularly interested in incentive-based zoning. So when Mies van der Rohe built the Seagram building in New York, he put in a plaza. So then a few years later, the city said, well, let's give developers a bonus if they put in more plazas. And a bonus meaning more floor area for very profitable space. Problem was there wasn't any feedback for this either. They ended up with a lot of plazas in the wrong place, and in some ways did damage to the city. So now we're looking at human ecosystems, urban systems in harmony, much like natural ecosystems, with these kind of feedback mechanisms you find in nature. And this is, frankly, of all the projects we're working on, the one I'm most excited about right now. And I'm not going to get into all the detail, but basically, you can define dozens, hundreds of things that a community needs after going through the insight process. They need a community center. Then you can create incentives for each of these that are tied to a financial performa. Then the developers can pick which they care about. And after that project is permitted, then everything resets, and all of those incentives can get adjusted so you get these feedback mechanisms, and over time you can reach harmony. At least that's our idea. So this is the visualization we showed before. Everything's out of whack. There's now we introduce the system with feedback, and you can see over time there's a convergence of amenities, jobs, and housing to achieve something like civic equilibrium or civic homeostasis, that sometimes we call it. So that's a really high-level view of some of the work we're doing. Now, Luis is going to dive into some of these areas in more detail. So thank you.
You do it. Let me see. Okay. Well, hi everyone. It is a pleasure to be here. I mean, talking after Ken is always challenging. Mostly when you have jet lag, you just want to go to bed. And anyway, no. All good, all good. So today Ken asked me to explain a little bit the network of collaborative cities that we have. And why this is important is because we have, in the last 12 years, we have never went out, to look for a city. All the cities, they were coming to us, the collaborations were happening in a very organic way. But now, city science is becoming a center. So from MIT, they are asking us to be a little bit more proactive and to increase the network. So then we were like, okay, so let's make this crazy trip that we are visiting 8 cities in 20 days, which is kind of amazing. We are enjoying, but also is kind of consuming a lot of energy. And the whole point is like trying to build these networks, as Ken was explaining. But what is needed for that? So let me, I can use the clicker. Let's see if this goes. Okay, perfect. Yeah. So right now, this is a little bit the network that we have. But what is needed to build a city science lab? The first thing is we build collaborations with cities. So it doesn't make any sense to have MIT going into a place and say, hey, this is what you need. We are MIT. No. We work with the city because we are learning. And when I say the city, is the community, everybody over there, because we are learning from them in the same way that they are learning from us. We like to align unlikely partners. Okay, this is key. Innovation happens when people that don't like each other works together. And that's historic. I mean, like, we are working with data every day. 12 years, I have been in the group, and we look into the data, and innovation happens when you have unlikely partners working together. We live in a very polarized world, doesn't make any sense. That is not bringing innovation, I am so sorry. So in our labs, we always try to have a frame where government, industry, academia, citizens can work together. And actually, sometimes we even bring, like enemy companies, like car companies that they don't like each other, and we put together these companies to think about the future of mobility and that kind of things. And that really push innovation into the next level. We build sister labs with the best local experts. I mean, that's why we have a laboratory in Tony. I mean, I think I don't have to explain, you are the best, so that's why we have this lab. And then we develop hyperlocal solutions for local problems. That's quite important, because again, I mean, like, if we export a solution from the western side of the planet, probably it's not gonna work here. We have global problems, but we need the local solution here. We need to work together to find that solution. And then the whole point is to improve quality of life, okay? That's the whole point. I mean, I know that we are in a school and we like to build tools, but if you are building tools that you don't know what is gonna be used to, that doesn't make that much sense. I mean, the goal is always trying to improve our quality of life. Let me walk a little bit through the network. The first laboratory that we opened was Andorra. I don't know how many of you know what is Andorra? Okay, not bad. Yeah, 4 people. That's good. So we have been working with them since many years ago. A lot of projects. By the way, for the people that doesn't know what is Andorra, is that dot over there between Spain and France. Maybe how many people knows what is Spain and France? Okay, 10 people, not bad, good. Okay, so that's Europe, and it is a very small country between Spain and France, okay? So it's so small that there are 70,000 people, and they have 9 million visitors per year. So the impact of tourism into this country is huge. And by the way, they don't have airports, they don't have train stations, they only have roads, okay? So can you imagine, like 9 million people getting into the country? That's a lot. So why we started with Andorra, it was because they are a very small country. They have the complexity of a country, but the scale of a city. So it was very easy for us to analyze and work with them. Then the leadership was aligned with us. So we were working with the ministers. We could change, actually we have changed the legislation. We made prototypes and deployments. Then we have very good access to data. And 12 years ago, legislation on data was very different. Even if we were using secure and anonymized methodologies, we were able to learn a lot from telecom data. I'm going to explain that later. And then they had super interesting challenges because, again, they had 9 million tourists. It was impacting into environment, into the economy, etc. We started very small. We started with the government, the Secretary of State, the telecom company, the energy company, and the university. By the way, the telecom company and the energy company at that time, they were, not collaborating a lot. So thanks to the project, they started collaborating with each other. They started sharing data. And now we have all the ministers working with us. We have 151 shops sharing information and data to the lab that we have over there. We have international connections. And the most important thing is this tiny lab has become one of the core innovation lab in Andorra. So that's powerful, but let's go back 12 years ago. This is CDR data, okay? This is telecom data. And this is a little bit what you can do with the data. You can visualize, you can see where is the volume of people in the country. And we were like, okay, but we want to understand this data. We want to understand the tourists through the telecom data, how they are moving, etc. And we want to build models to predict the impact of tourism in Andorra. My good friend, George Box, I like him. He said, all models are wrong, some are useful. That means humans, we are so complex that even if we made the best model, probably it's going to be wrong. But, and that makes sense. If Kent and I, we had a crystal ball, we will not be here. We will be investing in the stock market and we will be rich by now. So we don't have a crystal ball, but we have a forecasting tool, which is very good because it helps us to predict, to look into the future. So the first basic models that we did, they were not good, but they were interesting. We could see here in blue, we can see the flow of French people in the country, the most likely path. And in white, we have the most likely path from the Spaniards, a different visualization. Here we could predict what was going to be the most likely path for the individual. So the red was not likely, but the green, they were the most likely path for individuals. Again, it was not great. And then we could start visualizing how the tourism was happening in Andorra. So in blue, you have all these French people clustering in the border because they were, buying inexpensive tobacco, gasoline, and alcohol. And in orange, you have the Spaniards going to the Cirque du Soleil. That is a huge event. The ministers, they were super excited about this model. They were like, wow, now we can understand tourism, we can understand how people are moving. Kent was like, I'm not sure, I don't really understand this. Actually, the Cirque du Soleil is not happening over there, it's actually happening here. That's the antenna that has the data, we have to do it better. So Ken, of course, he was pushing us into the next level, and we learned that you have to correlate data with different types of sources in order to understand better the behavior. So here then we took TripAdvisor data. In red you have the parking lots, but they are not working very well. In green you have the opinion of the users that they like the parking lots. And this is restaurants. So we start correlating telecom data with qualitative information from social network data. This is in Instagram. At that time we were already using AI. Yeah, AI is not new, I'm sorry. Generative AI now is more accessible, but at that time we were using machine learning and neural networks. In dark blue you have the information that we were extracting from the picture, and in light blue we had the comments from the people that they were posting. And of course we could geolocate that information in a map, look into the language that they were posting. And something more important, as I said, the telecom company, it was not sharing data with the energy company. And we made this platform to help the energy company to share data with the telecom company, because Andorra only produces 10% of the energy that they consume in the country, so they have to buy 90% of the energy from Spain and France, which is a lot, and they have to pay upfront. So they need to simulate how it's going to be the consumption of tomorrow, so they can buy the energy today. And at that time, they were not looking into the behavior of tourism, so we made this model to correlate energy consumption and tourism. And here we are assuming in this information where the zero is the average consumption per Andorran, okay? And these lines, they are two different models, but they are more or less similar, that they are predicting the energy consumption from different nationalities. Here we see how Spain and France, they are more or less like the Andorrans, but UK, they consume more energy than the Andorrans, and Germans, they are much efficient than the Andorrans. So we went to the minister and we were like, hey, listen, this is what the data is telling us. What's going on? And the Minister of Tourism was like, this makes sense. UK is a winter kind of tourism. So that people, they go to ski, that is, very energy demanding. They go party at night, very energy demanding. Germans, no, they are summer. So they usually go to camping, and they hike in the mountain, so they don't even use the hotels. So it makes a lot of sense, this graph. Thanks to this, we help the energy company to, in some moments of the year, be 10% even more accurate in how they were predicting and consuming energy. There is a whole paper about that. But at that time, we were also very interested on the impact of, of the individuals as tourists in the snow. So we made what we call the Snow Lab, or the Breath of the Mountain. There are a couple of projects where we were putting sensors on the skiers to understand the quality of the snow, to understand the most likely paths that the tourists they were using in the mountain, etc., etc. There is a spin-off now from Andorra that they are operating in Canada out of this. Also, in the lab, we like to build sensors. I mean, we really like to build the stuff, but sensors are important. So these are the termites, and these termites, they have exactly the same type of sensors that you have in your smartphone, okay? So with this, we had the Minister of Education helping us to deploy sensors in their school. So then the students, they make these kind of Pythagoras where with all the sensors, they could make experiments and start understanding, okay, if I put 100 kids in the room, the temperature will rise, but then if I open the window, the temperature will decrease, but then I am losing energy. So it was kind of educational kind of work that we had through sensors. Actually, the Minister of Education changed the entire educational system after working with us. Something that also we did was like, we took the kids from the school and we sent them out with their grandparents so they could map Andorra with qualitative information, places that they like it, places that they dislike it, and we could map Andorra with that, which is important because usually urban planners and designers, we don't think about the kids or the grandparents. It's usually, like when we design. So it was very useful information. So then from, this kind of very crazy amount of data, then we could make models much accurate, where we could see the energy performance, the CO2 emissions. By the way, blue, there are French people, in orange we have Spanish people, and white there are other nationalities. At that time, Google was not operating in Andorra, so we were making also like congestion maps through telecom data, so they could have good information about congestion in Andorra. But the most important thing is that we made it a very simplified kind of tools where the ministers, they could look into the different events where they were putting money because they were making these events so they could attract tourism. This is a mountain bike event. It's great because it's bringing a lot of new visitors, but the congestion on the streets is crazy, no? So they were looking into a different event that is also about mountain bike. It's not bringing that many tourists. However, they spend more time in Andorra, so that's pretty cool. They are high-income people, so the ministers were like, oh, that's nice. And they don't have that much congestion. So for the ministers, these kind of tools were very useful for them to make decisions. Then when COVID hit Andorra, they were ready. They could correlate mobility data with serological data because they could test 90%, 95% of the population. And then they could make policies for the essential workers. So the essential workers, they could move, safer in Andorra. And of course, Forbes made this article about saying, United States should be learning from Andorra. The Prime Minister of Andorra was very happy. The cool thing is that we have more than 3 years of very good telecom data in Andorra, anonymized and secure. And now what we are trying to do is exactly what Ken was explaining before. Everything that Ken was explaining before about agents, they are AI agents, okay? So through AI, we are now trying to replicate exactly that telecom data, but without giving any information to the AI about the telecom data, okay? So we are using just census data and static data. Up here you have the real telecom data, and here you have the synthetic data, okay? And when you inject that two type of data in a simulation, let's say in a mobility simulation, you get into a 85% of accuracy between the real data and the synthetic data. So the congestions are happening more or less at the same time, in the same point of the city. That's pretty cool. But what is cooler is that now each of these dots, they can have this kind of like, they have their own, let's say, intelligence, because we can inject large language models on them. We can inject them in the 3D model of the city. So we send them over there. And then you can click into them and say, hey, how is your experience in the city? So now we can have qualitative information. We can ask to the model, can you imagine you are building that model, that physical model that you are building upstairs, and now you can ask to the model, oh, how people are living in my model? Do they like my model? Are they happy? That's cool, but then what happens when you have 40,000 of these agents? Right now with classical computing, we can do 40,000 of these agents, inject them in the city, and we can ask them questions to the global populations. Here we are asking, how is the access to amenities? And then you can map, places that they like or they dislike, but also parts of the population that they are more unhappy than others. Of course, as I say, we can do this with classical computing, but now we are exploring quantum computing. I always say, if you wanna, build a quantum computer, talk to Kent. He can put you in touch with the Nano Lab at MIT. They are building the qubits. If you wanna use a quantum computer, talk to Kent. He will put you in touch with IBM, the MIT. We are using that computers. Actually, we are using D-Wave. That is much better for optimization. in order to build the profiles that we have. But if you wanna, apply quantum computing today, talk to Kent. Because right now we are starting to apply quantum computing in our models. So instead of having only 40,000 agents, we are trying to have up to millions of agents that you can ask them questions about the city. Of course, part of the network, I was jumping from one part to another. Shanghai, we are here, Tonji, more than 9 years. And I don't know, I'm pretty sure that a lot of people in the room doesn't know all the projects that we have done together. But I really like this one because the Living Line was the beginning of the NICE project. And we built this model at MIT with Tonji in order to understand how was going to be allocated the different shops in the Living Line and what was going to be the impact in here. Another project, very quickly, I don't want to, probably you are hungry. So, as you can see, a lot of our projects, they are in the global north, but we are starting to work in the global south, in Guadalajara, Mexico, since 7 years, in Concepcion a couple of years ago. This is the laboratory in Concepcion, kind of 3 years old. And why I like to show this project, because, our name is City Science, and a lot of people ask, okay, how is it going to be the city of the future? And I always say, well, probably it's going to be an informal settlement. You say a villa. Yeah. Why? Because 90% of the new urban growth is going to happen in the global south. And nobody knows exactly the percentage, but it's probably around 80% of that growth is going to be informal. It's going to be a slum. Okay, so at City Science, what we try to do is we try to learn from people living in these neighborhoods because they are innovative, they have their own culture, they have their own economy. Every day they have access to water, to electricity, to food, to jobs, maybe in an illegal way. Okay, yeah, but I respect this kind of innovation because somehow they are making their daily lives, and we are learning a lot from these communities in the way that in places like in Concepcion, we work with the local Native Americans, looking in how can we improve their community with our tools, how can we help them to jump from the informal economy to the formal economy. Very quickly, Gipuzkoa, why I want to talk a little bit about Gipuzkoa, of course, because I am from Spain and I have to talk about my book, as we say in Spain. But this laboratory is quite new as well, 4 years. And the most important thing is that, as Ken was saying, the City Science Summit is going to happen here next year, this year in November, and all of you are invited to visit us. It's going to be amazing. And this is the moment where all the network comes together. So the network, we usually collaborate in a daily basis. Every month, all the directors are talking with each other. We have connections between the researchers, but every year, physically, we get together and we have a beautiful party. Last year, we have 3,000 people in Concepcion in Chile. When we did this, I think it was the 3rd City Science Summit. In Shanghai, we have more than 3,000 people in the place, and online, I don't know how many, people say that millions of people, I don't know, but it was a huge summit. And just to end, okay, this is the City Science Network, but what I want to show is the collaborative part of the network. I'm going to show only 2 projects very quickly, but what I am going to say is that the network is connected. So we have researchers working together. For instance, now we are leading the mobility toolkit, where we can build simulation tools that can operate everywhere in the world, okay? So this is, for instance, one example that is the a mobility choice model, where to the agents, AI agents that we built, then you can ask, okay, what is your mobility choice for moving from A to B? Are you going to use the bus? Are you going to use a bike? Are you going to walk? Depending on the different challenges that we have, or even just having the real conditions, and then we can understand what happens if we change the real conditions, what is going to be the impact in CO2 emissions, in mobility, in congestion. And the last one, the wildfires. This winter in Concepcion, they had a lot of wildfires. It happens every year, and it's getting worse and worse. So the entire network, we are building a research line about natural disasters. Actually, it's natural and human disasters. How can we, prevent occurring during the disaster, but also how can we recover from that? What happened this year is that we were kind of ready, so we built a tool that with satellite data, we have almost real-time information about the wildfires. So the lab over there, it could help communities to actually, get far from the fire, not try to protect their lives, but also the houses. It was very successful, this tool, because almost in real time people could see the fire. That our laboratory was on the news. This is, this is part of the team. And now they are actually today, the 15 Naro is over there, one of our researchers, because we are going to extend the laboratory not only in Concepcion, but it's going to be a network in Chile. So the laboratory is starting to become nationally impacting in a national level. So this is a little bit the picture of the city science network that I really like. So Kent is one of the pioneers talking about the smart cities, green cities, and this is all great. I mean, I love all these things, but what I really like is that we are beyond smart cities. Okay, so this is. The real question is actually how can we imagine the future of cities centered on humans, and that's why we are beyond, the smart technology, etc. Of course we do that, but what about the humans? Can you imagine the future city? I mean, like the city of the future in 50 years? I don't think you can imagine that. Can you do, did you see in the videos how it was changing from Barcelona 1901 to Barcelona 1960? I mean, that's what we try to do here. So thank you very much. See you soon.
So questions? Any questions?
I wonder how you choose the places where you make the
Okay.
gallery. Thanks a lot. I wonder how you choose the places where you do your cooperation, because you're saying you're gonna have more projects in the global south, and I don't know how much information is available about places like this. Like I'm from Egypt, for example, and I'm like
You're from where?
Egypt.
Egypt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Well, no, it's a great question, and to date, we have never chosen a place to work. We just have relationships, like I met Lo and people in the network, and we like to say we don't work with cities or universities, we work with people. So the people that we work with are people to date that have come to us. Now we're changing that a little bit, as Luis mentioned, because now we're being a little more proactive about trying to develop new labs. In fact, we tried to do one in Cairo. We never could get the funding, but we have an Egyptian researcher in our group who's trying to make that happen. I got connected to the former Prime Minister of Bhutan and through Joe Ito and others. So we're trying to put a city science lab in Bhutan because we know the people. So one of the reasons we're doing this crazy 8-city trip in 20 days is to strengthen those relations, find the people that we want to work with, and then hopefully launch, labs when the place is right, the people are right. Go ahead.
No, well, just to build a little bit on top of what Ken just said, and that's why we are trying to become a center, because if we get a center, probably we will get an endowment, so then we can have funding to work in places that is impossible to work on. So like in Latin America, we have figured out a little bit how to do a little bit the Robin Hood. For instance, in Guadalajara, Mexico, they don't need, they are the Silicon Valley of Mexico. They are amazing. But we were working with them in the innovation district, the cultural district of the University of Guadalajara, and then Kent was like, listen, close to the cultural center, you have this informal settlement that is Lomas del Centinela. We have to include that into the research. So that's a little bit how we are kind of operating a little bit right now, and we want to get a little bit stronger so we can decide to say, okay, we don't care if you don't have funding in this city, but we want to collaborate in that city.
We've been trying for years to get a lab in Africa. And MIT with the overhead is just so expensive. But if we can raise an endowment, I want to go to Africa without asking people to give us any money. You know, wealthy cities like Shanghai, they should give us money.
Thank you for the lecture. My name is Wu Jiayu. My question is, in the context of AI, what factors do you think should be considered for new building in cities today?
Okay, you mentioned that.
What factors need to be considered for building cities today? I think all factors and the new factors. It's super interesting, the question, because when, for instance, when we started working in Concepcion 3 or 4 years ago, the government was like, oh, we want to get rid of everything and we just want to, you know, do something new. And we were like, whoa, 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 listen, you have to learn first what is happening, what is working in the city. And so the first factor is what is working there. I mean, because sometimes as humans we want to buy the new stuff, we just want to use AI, and we forget about all the tools, all the things that are working. So it's very important to first analyze and say, okay, this is working, what is not working, and that's the thing that we have to start. Usually that's the sweet spot where we say, okay, let's make a project about this thing that is not working today. Then the second factor is humans. Models, I mean, some of the tables, the Cityscope, we call that Cityscope, other people call that digital twins, but the Cityscope, there are tables that you can ask questions. A lot of these tables, they have AI. And Ryan, that was a researcher from here, from Tonji, his master thesis...
His student originally.
Exactly. His master thesis, actually 5 years ago, was an AI tool that it was telling you how to work with the Cityscope to make the most efficient city. And so you were following the computer and then you were designing a city. The problem is that our tables are for community engagement. So people were just following the computer, and after that community engagement, nobody knew. It was like, oh, I don't know. I mean, yeah, we have a very nice radar, etc. Then when we removed the AI from the table, the output was not that good, but the humans had a conversation about, okay, what if I move this, and that's, so humans are the most important thing.
Yeah, one thing I'll add that, you know, we do a lot of work with architects. In fact, we were just at Norman Foster's office here today, Foster & Partners. And I think what AI will do will give superpowers to great designers. Right now, in architectural practice, you don't have the fees, you don't have the time to think about the full range of issues that really should be considered. For example, developing a new district, you know, for most architects is primarily a formal issue. But what about the social implications? What about the economic implications? What about the alternatives that could create a real vibrant innovation district that would lower emissions, that would improve the social ties, et cetera? I mean, they don't have the tools to do any of that. And for the, you know, for a conventional project. And I think, you know, on the negative side is an office can do that kind of work with fewer people, do the work they do today with fewer people. But I think it also can give them the ability to do work that's of much higher value to their clients as well as to the city. So I'm actually very optimistic in the hands of really skilled people.
More questions?
Thank you for your talk. And I hear that you mentioned a lot about AI agents when you develop something to study the society. And what structural changes would occur in urban social relationships individuals in the future has continuously accompanied AI agents with themselves? Will the simulation system kind of expire in this situation, or what adjustments will be done?
He always gives me the easy ones. So, I mean, like something that, of course, these systems, they are going to be improving. I mean, every 3 months we are kind of, if something new happens and AI gets improved. And the most interesting thing is that we are not trashing all the knowledge that we have. We are including the AI into specific elements of our process, okay? So we are not just having an AI doing everything. We have ABM, we have whatever. We have many different tools. We simulate the city. And the whole point here is trying to calibrate that and validate that with the real questionnaires with humans. So we build the synthetic population, but we try always to have the real opinion of humans that they are living in that city. That's the first thing. So we are always recalibrating a little bit the AI. And the other thing is that we make a forecast. So you just inject the agents, and now you can say, okay, how the evolution of the city is going to be in the next 50 years. Of course, that's not going to be perfect. Then you have, but it's like a stock market. When you are investing, you say, okay, how is it going to be the evolution in 50 years? Then 3 months later, you have a whatever, a disaster, and your market is crashing. So the same thing in the cities. So the cool thing is, what if we have these systems, that is what Ken usually calls this the operational system of the city, that you make the model of the city, and then the developers, the architects, the government, we have that system is evolving, and then you can compare with the reality and say, hey, we are deviating from the simulation. Let's come together. Let's see what is going on in the city, and let's improve the model, but also the city. So I don't know if I am answering.
Yeah. So AI is a very complicated topic. For example, talk about cities. The AI assistance, Claude Code and all of this, is changing the nature of work. So that will transform, I think, knowledge work to a really significant degree. Now, one could build an agentic system to try to predict the impact of AI on society, right? So they're using AI in a very different way. We can use various generative tools and analytical AI tools to help with the design of the city that can accommodate how work is changing due to AI agents. We can use AI in governance systems, so like I showed with zoning. So then public policy can be much more responsive to the changes caused by AI. You see, so it's never ending. So I don't really like talking about AI as a thing, because AI is just a whole bunch of different operations and models and algorithms that all do lots of different things. So it all depends on what you're talking about.
Hi, I'm already holding the mic. So
Where are you? Oh, back here now.
yeah. So I got 2 questions. So first of all, thanks for the amazing lecture. So first of all, I want to know your opinion, like how do you measure the impact of these collaborations, improving the quality of life in these networked participating cities?
Well, that's always hard. Some of the labs are, they're much larger and they do a wide range of projects. I mean, I showed, for example, the Hamburg project. I mean, we were able to quantify the impact on that. In fact, the mayor said his popularity was declining due to all the stress of the refugee situation and the polarization. And our project helped him, come out of that slump and improve his popularity enough that he became Chancellor of Germany. I'm not claiming that was due to our project, but we could quantify that we had some impact on that local community. In many cases, the projects are smaller. It's hard to gauge the direct impact. I think the project that we have, our housing project, which is not in the network, but that we can quantify the reduction in the cost of housing in some of the cities where that's operating. So we need to do continuously try to evaluate the impact that we have. But it's a lot of these projects are qualitative. They're hard to pin down.
But that's right. And each have. I mean, a lot of times we ask them, what is success for you? And they usually they set their own standards of success, and so I think that's important. And just the only thing that I want to add, what Ken just said, is that we have a very interesting project that is the University of Milano. Since I think 6 years ago, they are following the network. It's a group of researchers, and they are like we are. we are the guinea pigs for them. So they are analyzing our network, making operations with other kind of networks. So if you're interested, we can show you their work. And again, I mean, nothing is perfect, but I think it shows a little bit how scientifically the University of Milano is understanding our impact. So that's what they're
Yeah, and they're not in our network. That was a third party that came in to try to assess the impact of our network. So that's a good study.
Yeah, the reason why I ask this question, I think I have to thanks to Lo to bring the MIT here actually, to bring the quality of life of the neighborhood surrounding here. And also I think this is could be the impact of the Shanghai City Science Lab here. And then the second question is, what are the biggest challenge for you to align the stakeholders with different priority and interest across the cities?
No, usually
Yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, we're working in last year in particular. We worked in San Francisco to help them with their rezoning. I talked about zoning. One of the reasons we did that project is realizing how completely broken and dysfunctional zoning is. So they had a mandate from the state, basically a gun to the head of the city, saying if you don't build 82,000 homes, you lose local zoning control and the state will take over. And so the mayor and the local communities were motivated to to address the challenge of the housing crisis, but they were hugely polarized. You've probably heard of the YIMBY-NIMBY battles. You know, the NIMBY is not in my backyard, YIMBY is yes in my backyard, and the NIMBYs tend to be older property owners that are more conservative and they don't want change, and the YIMBYs tend to be younger people that want more affordable housing and amenities, and you know what, they're both right. So we were trying to find common ground between them, and there's a lot of common ground. For example, if you ask somebody who opposes housing near where they live, but you ask them, do you think that your children and your grandchildren should be able to afford housing in your neighborhood and continue to live close to you? They'll say yes. Okay, then you can start trying to identify the solutions. So that project consensus that I talked about, it's really about finding common ground in the community. And it's increasingly hard in a polarized society, but I think there are ways to do that.
And super briefly, but also we don't have we have a small agenda that is improving quality of life, and after 12 years at least working with data, we know more or less what that means in terms of, so you could see the CO2 emissions, no? like walkable communities, like where you have communities in harmony, where you have diversity of different economic profiles and age profiles. They are walkable, they are in nature is part of that, also important. We know that that's important, and so we have kind of, but on top of that, we are kind of agnostic. I mean, like if people know that at MIT we are neutral. I mean, you have an idea, okay, give it to us. We build the model, and let's compare your idea with the other idea. I mean, and that's.
I'm not always neutral.
Yeah, I know. But we try to be as neutral as possible because at the end of the day, it doesn't make sense to make a discussion with thoughts. We can build a model. That's it. Don't worry. Let's build the model and let's have the discussion after the model. And that's why. And show us why this is important for you. Because even if we don't, I mean, sometimes maybe you have an argument with a person that you don't like. But if that person is able to build a model and explain to you why he wants to do that, probably you will resonate a little bit with that person. Maybe you will not like the solution, but you will understand why that person is trying to do that. So that's a little bit how we try to come together, to put together all the stakeholders.
More questions?
Thank you, and thank you for the lecture. It's really a pleasure to participate. Actually, I think the city science lab in MIT played a profound influence over the years. We can see the evolution actually with without AI, you still take leadership based on the multi system. I think it's very early stage to simulate the city. That's quite interesting because I'm right at the beginning of the architecture school, so I really appreciate the leadership from MIT. Actually, it's kind of the culture you produce, the sharing culture, inclusive. I think that's really important. Leading the world, actually re-understanding what is the city and how to understand the city and analysis simulate city in different ways. Really ahead of time, I think over 10 years ago, already started a new concept, even though without AI. But with AI right now, the evolution is even quicker. I think the tools will change a lot of things. But right now, the most important thing I want to ask you the question, because MIT is very special. I think the team is not big compared to the Shanghai, a lot of AI teams is super big, hundreds of people, but we really only have some people here. And really, the question goes, how you manage the system, how to organize the system, because a lot of it's like the collaboration is based on the important people's PhD and also the professional researchers in the team, and how MIT Media Lab organize the team, because you need funding to support yourself, as well as so many branch collaborations, and how you share with what is the common ground, common knowledge produced, what the key knowledge, also from eventual common ground to share with others, and how to keep this kind of the quality of the knowledge that can still collaborating give this kind of service and influence leading the first, because 1 year is simple, 10 years is difficult, right? So because a lot of simulation tools actually with AI, don't you have a hyper agent system we just developed based on the AI, leading by Professor Wu Zhiqiang. We just had a meeting this afternoon. We can simulate over 10,000 agents in the Shanghai city based on multi-layers, hundreds of layers of different kinds of scenarios. That's the technology already there. And with support of AI, everything can be support. But I think the meaningful, interesting part from yours is like the human. I think it's kind of design thinking. You put the human in the center. It's kind of without the boundaries, the nation of countries, actually, cross nations, it's very human-centric. Although the AI is there, but it's still very human-centric. That's the very special, it's like a vision it was a key many years. So how would you like to address the relationship between this kind of human and science, this kind of collaboration, culture is still exists to keep in your group? So 2 questions.
Okay.
This is a question from the dean.
Well, thank you.
We want to know
thank you for those comments.
backstage story.
You're a designer. You know, I've always thought of designing initially the research group and now the network as a design problem itself. And the first thing that's key is to bring the right people in. So that's really important. And when I look at students, I really don't care very much about their academic credentials. I mean, look at that. It's more about my intuition about how creative they are, how well they would work with people, how collaborative they are, and so first of all, good people. That's where you start. It's all about the people. Then for the network, we now have, I think, 10 full-time research scientists in the group, in addition to the students and the visiting scholars and the undergraduates, et cetera, that work with us. And so each one of those is responsible for working, being the liaison and helping to lead the research in that node in our network. And so in that way, we can leverage our ability through this much larger network that's now several hundred people. So yeah, the MIT group is less than 30, but we have this larger network. So it's just like, using a lever, to have more impact. And we also try to build a culture that's exactly as you say. We're not technology first. We're trying to make a better world for people. And then we use the technology when it's needed. And sometimes when I go to other schools and I see student presentations, they lead with the technology. And I stop them and say, no, what are you trying to do here? What is your mission? And then tell me, how are you, using technology to get there? And I think the media, that's in the blood. Everything is about making a world, a better place for people. And the technology is a tool. And I think that kind of thinking helps us stay focused on our mission.
No, it's a great question. The only thing that I want to say is that AI has been, with us since a long time. My father was a professor at the Polytechnic of Madrid in the 80s, and he had CETICO, that was one of the most important laboratories in AI at that moment. So yeah, in the 80s we were already looking into AI. Now the only difference is that it's generative AI. So it's one tool. It will change everything, but in Spain we say gato pardo. That means everything will change to stay the same. So somehow humans, we try to always, change things, but we are humans. So looking into, quality of life is one of the things that, at least I know that that's the right direction. And it doesn't matter the tool. So we had, at dinner, we had a conversation about humanized robots, that they are amazing. I mean, I am in love. I mean, like, after Sensen, I was like, wow, this is amazing. Then, but then we think a little bit about what is going to be the use of these robots. So I think in our group we think a little bit in a different way. It's more about, okay, what is the problem, and then we will build the robots or we will build the tool. But let's first with the human challenge that we have to face, and then we build the technology. But it's fantastic to have the.
Yeah. So I'll tell a little story. 1956, these 4 young graduate students, or recent graduates, they were in their late 20s, they got together at Cornell and they proposed a summer workshop, and they asked for $17,000 for the summer, and one of them was Marvin Minsky. And that proposal was the first use of the term artificial intelligence. And then Marvin came. He was at Harvard at the time. Then he joined the faculty at MIT and launched the AI lab a few years later. Then when Nicholas Negroponte formed the Media Lab 41 years ago, Marvin shifted from the AI lab that he founded to the Media Lab for that very reason. He wanted to focus on the human and societal impact of AI, not just do pure technical research. By the way, how many of you know Marvin Minsky? A few people. How many know 2001's A Space Odyssey, the movie? Right. Marvin was Stanley Kubrick's consultant who developed the vision of how the rogue AI on the spaceship. So that's how far back the Media Lab goes with AI.
That's a good story. So we last 2 questions. I think that's too late.
Thank you for that.
Ask the short question. Answer shortly.
What's that?
Short question.
Short question, short answer. Okay.
So I know the entrepreneurship ecosystem is very strong around MIT. So what other kinds of startup have you incubated based on your research beyond the transformable laboratories or something?
Yeah, so there probably Kent has better memory than I, but there is Sufa, that it was one of this urban furniture that it was dealing with data. So that's one of the first startups that we have. Audit, that is the architectural robotics that you can that is still very successful in the United States with Google and IKEA as investors. We have Butler, that actually is from Hung Hao. Hung Hao is not from Shanghai, but
He's from Hangzhou.
I
think so.
And then Ryan, the junior student, now is working in Butler, and they have the production of the sensors, because it's a sensor company in Shenzhen. So What else? I am missing something.
What was L3?
L3, that is the consulting company that Kenry is leading. I don't know. So there, and then on top of that, like for instance in the network, many other, like the Snow Lab, that's was a spin-off that Orange they did.
There was Optimus Ride, an early autonomous vehicle company that didn't make it, but
Yeah. Well, it was
Good-
quite
good try.
It was a good
Yeah.
try for a couple of years. So yeah.
Okay, thanks for your insightful talk. So I'm measuring human factors and engineering and age-friendly design. I'm really interested about your research about the transformable micro-housing and living labs. My question is, when defining human spatial awareness and activity dimensions for diverse users, especially the elderly, what main standards and user research methods does your team adopt? Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's a good question because when Ori spin off out of the lab, they are not doing the sensor part. I mean, they have some sensors in the house, but then we developed a couple of projects also with Ryan. One was the blind eye. That it was sensors in the house that they take care of you, no? Like for elderly people, for instance, if an elderly person is waking up, not in a normal basis, and then one night wakes up at 3 o'clock in the morning and starts cooking, okay. But if that happens often, if the pattern change, then the house is sending a text message to the family, etc. So we in the group, we start exploring these ideas of the house taking care of you, and now Butler is also taking that into the commercial side. So I cannot talk too much about what Butler is doing, but it's really, really, really starting to think about elderly and how the house can you know, if you have an issue, if you fall, etc., the house will know that you fall, and then it will have some response.
And one way that I want these two companies to come together for the elderly, for example. So if I'm in a wheelchair and I'm in my kitchen, I need to have this wheelchair turning radius, and this counter needs to be very low, right? But now maybe their spouse, I hope it works better than that. And their spouse maybe is tall, has a bad back, uses a walker, right? So I need the counter to be up high. And then I need a very tight space, so if I start to fall, I have grasping surface. So there's no reason why the same kitchen can't accommodate both. And you understand the context, and you dynamically transform the environment, and it works for both people. Right now, you have to pick, and normally the wheelchair wins, and everybody else doesn't fit well in the space.
Okay, I think that thank you very much for this wonderful talk, and you're so generous on answering questions. So let's give Ken and Luis a big applause.